Well, we're here with the Dolls and the Shaners, and we're excited to talk to kind of cap off our series on romantic relationships with them, and just get some real practical wisdom. We've hopefully talked a little bit about what the Bible has had to say about some of these things, about marriage and dating, and how what the Bible has to say about marriage applies to our dating lives. But this is kind of the true capstone and cornerstone of what we're going to do. And hopefully the payoff, if you kind of bore through me, like talking at you through the video camera, this is going to kind of be like your reward, is this moment where you get to reap some real wisdom from some awesome people. So without further ado, let us introduce you to our illustrious panel by asking them our first question. And that is, please tell us your quote unquote love story in 1 minute or less.
Okay, you can start.
Age before beauty.
The spark has already begun. I think that means the Dolls have to go first.
Usually when you say, what was your love story, you're talking about how you met and fell in love and all that. And just very briefly, we met at the Student Center our sophomore year in college in the dining room at an Old Testament survey class. We dated starting a few months after that, and a couple of years later we were married. And I think that really that's when the love story started, because that's when we started trying to learn how to love each other for real.
That is amazing that it started with an Old Testament survey class. That's beautiful to me. So, Shaners.
You want me to go or you?
Go for it.
60 seconds or less. I was a missionary in Italy. Jennifer was a college student in Italy, here in Florence. And she had a boyfriend at the Naval Academy, and I stole her from him with my suave Italian-like ways and my ability to woo her as only a Italian man could, even though I'm American.
So you used your spirituality as a missionary to kind of like woo her, right? Like it was that really, really won her over, the fact that you were like a super spiritual missionary guy.
Yeah, that, and I had like long hair and black leather jackets and stuff like that. Not super long hair.
I'm serious. That was true. I was dating a guy from the Naval Academy, and he was starting to talk marriage over the phone, and there were a lot of things we had not talked about very much, and he wasn't willing to talk about. One of them being religious differences. We're both Protestants, but different church denominations, and that to me was a serious thing. And so every time he brought it up, I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about this. And he's like, no, that's something it's not a big deal. He was like, we'll figure it out, we'll work it out. And I'm like, no, to me it is a big deal. And so the more I got to know Matt, and that was one thing that as I liked him, that was a security. I was like, here's a Church of Christ boy that believes the same as me on all these things that the other boy won't talk about. So that was actually that. And then there were other things that bothered me with the guy I was dating at the time. They seemed to be make Matt shine brighter, all of his wonderful qualities. So,
and let me jump in there, and I'm not saying anything against the Church of Christ, but it wasn't necessarily that I was Church of Christ. It was that we were on the same page.
Yeah.
Like you could go to the same church with somebody and still not be on the same page on a lot of spiritual and theological issues, and that can make things problematic for you.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And that's something that, like, actually, do y'all maybe, I think that could spur a pretty good question. How do you, like, in a dating relationship, how would you kind of like advise a college student to talk about their spirituality with their significant other, whether they be on the same page or not? Like, how should college students be talking about their faith and their spirituality with their significant other while in college?
Well, I mean, the easiest thing, I think, is to like go to church together and see what happens. Not that you should avoid a conversation, but like it doesn't necessarily have to be a nerve-wracking thing. Like, how do I bring this up? You know, I think from the beginning of our relationship, like we went to church together, and so some of those conversations sort of organically happened instead of having to like fret over how am I going to have this conversation.
Yeah. Dolls, do you have anything to
Yeah.
say?
I would say don't make up your mind about where they are until you've known them for at least 3 months.
Mm. Yeah, I think there was a lot of wisdom in that. That's really cool. So just for the sake of time,
Something like my boyfriend had said about like we'll figure this out after we get married. That's a big red flag, and that's
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a deal breaker. That should be a deal breaker for anybody.
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, yeah. If they're like unwilling, like so basically unwillingness to talk about it, not a good sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it won't just fix itself after you're married, basically.
So for the sake of time, we'll move on. So basically, how it's kind of a weird question, but how would your marriage look different if you weren't Christian, right? So in other words, like how does your Christian faith affect your marriage?
Yeah, we wouldn't have a marriage if we hadn't been of similar faith, because we were both looking for someone who was first a believer. And so if by some chance we had found each other outside of Christ, the marriage would probably have been over 35 years ago, and I would have died an alcoholic 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Something like that.
For us, I think it has built a social and support network that we share as opposed to different ones. So if we weren't Christians, I don't think I'd be an alcoholic, but I'd certainly be a workaholic. And I would probably, have this whole life that my wife was completely uninvolved in that revolved around my work and my friends from work. The fact that we're Christians gives us a common community to sort of be the core social aspect of our life. And I don't mean to downplay any of the spiritual significance of it, but just from a really practical sense, like we spend time together because we have the same friends and we're interested in the same activities, and a lot of that revolves around church.
Yeah, like that just kind of makes me want to ask just another side question, and that's like, like how has how has your marriage, what's the relationship between your marriage and then like the local church body? Like how have those formed each other? If that makes sense.
Well, for us, we've lived 6 or 7 places since we've been married. We've been to 4, 5, 6 different churches, not because we church hop, but because we move a lot. And we've had really good church experiences and we've had some really bad church experiences. And so like experiencing that has in some ways like helped us figure out like what's important to us spiritually, but in doing so, like we communicate better. I keep using that phrase, on the same page about things related to our faith, because in some ways our faith has been tested together as opposed to individually.
Yeah, I think that's true for us as well. We've been part of the same congregation for nearly 50 years. The campus minister performed the wedding ceremony, did our premarital counseling. His wife stitched the gown. Most of our mentors have been in this congregation. There have been others, and we did cycle out for about 8 years for graduate school. But we were too young and ignorant and poor to know better. And they weren't giving us really good odds on ever making it, but there were a lot of church folks pulling for us and still are. They're way beyond extended family in terms of closeness and support.
One other thing that just popped into my head that I would also add. We went to a church early on in our marriage that was very, very influential in our attitudes about money and finances and giving. And that has been something that has immensely helped our marriage and has stayed with us we'll be married 16 years this summer.
So yeah, just like the way, like the y'all's commitment to a church ended up forming your marriage in a really positive way. Yeah. That's awesome.
Okay. So next question. What does Christian marriage actually look like? The good, the bad, and the ugly?
What's yours?
I think the hardest part of marriage is just taking two people who are not compatible, because nobody is, tying them together with this really tight knot till death do they part. And you just have to figure it out how you can live with this other person that you hardly know at first. You have to go through a lot of negotiations and conflicts and struggles, and if you figure out how to work through those things, then you become stronger. You learn how to love each other. You learn a lot of humility, a lot of sacrificing. And the most joyous thing I think about a marriage is that you've got this partner to go through life with. You don't have to be alone. You have somebody to share everything, to experience everything, the ups and the downs and the highs and lows and the good and the bad and the ugly. You don't have to do it by yourself.
When that time in your life that pops up is, in my mind, is the time whenever you were, I don't know if
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
okay. Matt was let go from an agency he worked at when we were in Little Rock, and it was very unexpected and unpleasant experience, and he was kind of scared and unsure about things. But I think both being Christians, there are times like that where I don't know, I felt God, closer to God, and my faith felt stronger. Like I was able to encourage him because I felt at peace about it, and I was just like, this door is closing on us. We weren't planning on it, but it just means that something better is out there for us. And I truly believe that, and I was able to encourage him whenever he was really down. And I know that times like that usually are really hard on marriages and couples, and are things that can split people apart. But it was a time when I feel like our faith was strengthened, and we were, that whole iron sharpens iron thing. We were able to encourage one another during that time. And there's been multiple occasions like that. I think that that's one huge benefit of both being Christians.
Yeah.
That's really, I think it's super powerful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else to add on that, anyone? So what roles do you think that vulnerability and then trust play in your marriage?
The model of the Trinity is that they have perfect union because there's absolute vulnerability and trust amongst them. And this, in the first 20 years of our marriage, was probably the biggest barrier to our marriage being absolute bliss, because I had real problems with vulnerability and intimacy because of my upbringing. My background was such that you just don't let people know what's going on, or else. And the more that you learn to share your heart, the closer you get. Especially when you have somebody that's absolutely committed to you and you can trust. You found a safe place. I think that's another good point for really not making up your mind about somebody for many months, because you don't know them well enough to discern how much you can trust them. Well, if you've been married for 10 years and you're still not trusting somebody, there's a real issue. And we need professional help to work through some of that. And since then, I've learned that being able to say, I feel like an iceberg floating south because this is what happened at work today, to the one who is your one flesh partner, just it's like Melanie was referring to. You have two are better than one. You're not easily broken when you have, and to be able to share and have somebody, you know, in the Hallmark movies they say that gets you, it's a tremendous blessing in this life.
Like, can you expand on, like, you seem to focus, and it's a really beautiful kind of trajectory you're laying out, but basically it's like things aren't going to be perfect for a while, you know, like things are just not going to be, you know, blissful automatically, but like just continuing to work over time. Like, and I think even before this conversation, I've heard you say this idea of just like the last 20 years of y'all's marriage have been the best 20 years of y'all's marriage. Like, it just, the more you work on it, the better it gets.
Once we got through that first 25, it's been gravy. Yeah.
Sorry to butt in, Shane.
What was the question again?
So what roles do vulnerability and trust play in your marriage?
So that's a big difference between dating and marriage. When you're dating someone, like you have to be always on, like you kind of keep up the right persona because you want to be attractive to that person and you want them to like you. But like, that's pretty exhausting to do that all the time. And I think marriage provides you a safe space to be able to let your guard down without having to feel like you're always on. And without having to worry that if I somehow let my guard down or if I get real with somebody for a minute, that like they're not going to like me anymore and this relationship's going to be over.
Yeah.
Now, there's things I do that annoy the fire out of my wife, but sticks with me anyway.
Jennifer, please name those top 5. Before you do that, we will move on. How, I guess, like one thing that actually, as we started this series on relationships, even just all kind of relationships, we actually started with a lesson on like healthy conflict and what healthy conflict looks like. And so I was just wondering kind of like, what is the role that healthy conflict has played in your marriage? And what does it look like? How do you go about like having a conflict in a Christian way in your marriage?
I think it took us time to figure that out. We had to learn to fight fair. I think in the beginning we struggled. You always hear like your honeymoon phase and how wonderful it is, and I think we probably had more fights that first year, and I got pretty depressed whenever at one point. But we learned, like we went to a marriage seminar, like that first church we talked about that really set some good foundations for our marriage. Like there was a marriage seminar that all of our friends went to, and that was really good, like working through some stuff. We did premarital counseling, and I'm trying to remember what the point I was making, but anyway, that, and we just learned how to fight fair. We learned the things that we were doing to sabotage ourselves and our fights and stuff. And anyway, I think we still get mad and stay mad sometimes for longer than we probably should, but I think we've come a long way. Don't you?
Yeah, I mean, and everybody's different in their personality, but like I've never been a person who backs away from a fight. Like I was kind of scrappy as a kid and as an adult a little bit, and so it's like I had to learn you can't treat your wife that way. And you know, as Jennifer said, that first year or two, like there was some pretty hard truths that you had to learn about. Like if you really love somebody and you really want to like be committed to them, you sort of have to put aside some of your natural inclinations and treat people better, which you should do to everybody, but particularly to your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah, and like even I've just heard people kind of like nothing can make you realize how great a sinner you are than like entering into marriage, you know, like, and like my assumption is like, or at least for me, like I've had the experience, my family tells me this all the time, that like there's pre-Mary Beth Ben and post-Mary Beth Ben. And my family is a much bigger fan of post-Mary Beth Ben because post-Mary Beth Ben is less combative and less argumentative. And I know that may be hard for you to believe that I could be more argumentative or combative, but back when I was 18 to 22, it was very possible. So.
But on the other end of that, I also think I now approach conflict more than I ever would have in the past since we have been married too. I used to just avoid all conflict at all costs, and I still do that sometimes. But I
think we have a similar situation where I was always sort of like, once again into the fray, like I kind of almost enjoyed conflict, and Jennifer has always been a conflict avoider, which makes for an interesting dynamic in a marriage.
yeah.
Dolls.
With us, we were not fighters. We were more conflict avoiders. And so the problem with that is that you withdraw from each other and you shut down, and it's, what's the matter? Nothing. Well, obviously, yes, something is the matter. And we also did a couple of marriage seminars that were very helpful in learning how to fight fair, as like Jennifer said. And one of the things that we learned is that with conflict, when you withdraw from it and you go your own way, then at some point you want to come back together again. You want to, get over it. And you've got to go back through the conflict. You've got to work it out. You can't go around it or over it or behind it. You've got to go back through it, or else it's still going to be out there, waiting to raise its ugly head again. It's not going to just go away, I don't think, in most cases. And so you've got to learn how to work it out and learn how to say things like, when you did this or when you said that, it made me feel like this because. And that way you're not indicting the other person. You're not being, you're not threatening them or accusing them, but you're opening yourself up to say, how you feel and what are we going to do to get by this, to get over this, to get through this.
I'm thankful Melanie had the strength to insist that we do it that way, because it's much more fun now than being a coldly aloof knucklehead.
Well, and I would say maybe you could identify with this, Ben, since we seem to be of a similar temperament in the way in conflict. I had to learn that you could be right but be wrong because of the way that you handle your rightness.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter if you have the facts on your side. If you damage a relationship in the process, you still lose.
Yeah. Well, like I love like the phrase of like fighting fair, because like to me what that means is like you're not fighting to win. Like, fighting fair is to like push through the conflict as a couple so that you can get onto the other side where you're both flourishing, not to where you like defeated the enemy. And where like that's like I just have that like tendency to where like that's just where I go, and that's just, it doesn't matter how right you are, as Matt was saying, you're wrong. If your goal is to defeat the enemy in a spat in your marriage, you're wrong. It just doesn't matter. Well, sorry, I feel like we just keep like pushing through, but time. I'm trying to stay on top of time. So here we go. The next question. What does covenantal faithfulness look like in a Christian marriage? And you can talk about sexual fidelity, but even like beyond, like we kind of know what that means, right? Like don't have sex outside of marriage, right? But what does covenantal faithfulness look like even beyond just sexual fidelity in a Christian marriage?
I think that's a critical principle to really camp out on, that this idea of covenantal faithfulness and marriage as a vehicle for transformation are all tangled up together in Christian marriage. That you don't go just based on your feelings. There's a guy at Penn State who made a career out of looking at why people keep commitments. Michael P. Johnson, Dr. Johnson. I think you can still get some of his YouTubes. as a professor emeritus. But as you quoted from Song of Solomon, we're sealed together by God in a Christian marriage. And so you have this want to, in the beginning, this personal reason for keeping your commitment. You know, I look at Melanie, she's really nice looking. She smiles when she sees me. I want to be with her, okay? And then after the first few years, she's saying, well, he was cute, but now he's just aggravating, you know? And so, but I ought to stay with him because I stood up and kept these. So you get the want to and the ought to mixed up. And if you're sealed by God, there's the third part is the have to. So what Dr. Johnson has kind of distilled down for us is there's a want to, ought to, and have to tangled up in why people keep commitments. And really the want to growing out of the steadfast love of God for you and grace extended to you being reflected to your spouse. Really the want to becomes the predominant feature in a marriage of covenant faith. But you've also, I mean, you can't dissect out, I'll do that because God hates divorce. Or I have to do that because if I don't, then I'm going to be in big trouble with God. Or I have to do that because, you know, in our tradition, if you get divorced, you don't have the option to get married again. And there's really nobody that's going to take me on after they see the way I treated Melanie. So you have this great vehicle for transformation. It's not that Melanie's trying to change me. It's that because we made a commitment before God and before witnesses, and with the little bit of faith we had, we're determined that by God's grace we keep the commitment. Then it's really an incredible journey to be in a position where you don't have to have all the social pressures, the family pressures. You know, those are nice to have, especially in the beginning. I don't want to completely leave those out, but having a heart that's being transformed into wanting to do love because you're loved. And we can't love unless we were loved. And then we get this great vehicle, kind of like I always, you know, when I do a wedding ceremony, I always tell folks, think of your spouse when the glow wears off as a spiritual workout partner.
Shanners.
I think on a really practical level, there's like some structural boundaries you can put in place to just help you. Like, I don't think either of us have ever like intentionally done something to be unfaithful to one another that I know of. But, you know, like early on in our marriage, it's like, you know, you shouldn't go to dinner with somebody of the opposite sex, you know, in a, not that this really happened, but hypothetically speaking, in a dark restaurant with candlelight and romantic music. Like, that's just not a good idea, even if you are well-intentioned. So like there's things that we do that we put in place or things that we don't do, not because like we're just chomping at the bit to cheat on one another, but because we know that like there's some healthy boundaries that we should put in place that help protect our own hearts. Even when we don't think that our intentions are bad, if that makes sense. Like, I'll tell you one, and this is another practical thing. I don't think like if Jennifer asks me to see my Facebook account or my email, like she can have it. I'll give her my passwords or like hand her my phone. Like, we don't have social media secrets from each other in that regard, because, you know, unfortunately that's a temptation for people these days, is reconnecting with old flames or new flames. And, you know, you just, like, if you put that boundary in place that there's no privacy of your social media accounts, for example, like that becomes not just not a temptation, but that like that's so far out of the realm of possibility that it becomes more difficult for you to slip into something like that. Not that it's impossible, but like you're putting safeguards in place to make sure that doesn't happen.
One thing that I've noticed just kind of both of y'all saying, or it's kind of this common theme, is like this idea of like as you continually make choices of faithfulness in your marriage, it kind of habituates itself in your life to where it becomes not just a thing you have to do or ought to do, but what you want to do. And as you like continue to habituate those like healthy practices, it becomes like second nature in a really beautiful way. Am I somewhat on kind of what y'all are saying in some level?
Yeah, I would add to that though, and this is going to be the most unromantic thing that's been said today. But infidelity could happen to the Shaners, it could happen to the Brinkerhoffs, it could happen to the Dolls. And if you think that you're not susceptible to that, then you're being deceived. And so being covenantal in your marriage means acknowledging the fact that like it could happen to you if you don't if you're not careful.
Amen.
That's exactly right.
That's If you're listening to this, there's wisdom in what was just said.
That's one thing that terrifies me sometimes, reading through the Bible and all these examples of like a really great king and he did everything right, and then his kids just turn around, or like his, and it's just, anyway, so it's just one of those, or the person themselves was a really good person of God, and then they just completely change, and it's, we can't let our guard down. We got to keep guarding our, keep our, like David's one of the best examples.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we can't let our guard down, and we have to protect ourselves. And Matt and I have talked about that several times, like when he went into the teaching and stuff. I just, not just that he would never have, not that I was worried about him, but even the whole having a student come in or a coworker come in, the doors shut there, what the student or coworker might, say later on or want to try to start. And so we've had talks about that and just ways to try to protect himself from anything happening. The same whenever I was in the workforce, I realized whenever friendships were becoming like a little too close, where you should, kind of like Matt said, where, you're starting to hang out more, and it's just like, this isn't right. This is, anyway.
Yeah.
Kind of rambling.
Yeah, something we decided early on in our marriage was that if either one of us ever started to have inappropriate feelings for someone, that we would tell each other what was going on. And that was a good way to just, stop it, nip it in the bud.
Yeah, like that, I'm sure that's hard conversation to have, but it protects a lot harder conversations down the road, possibly.
Yeah.
To come up. Yeah. Okay. All right. So next, and maybe last question. So what advice would you give college students currently engaged or in a dating relationship or looking for a relationship?
One thing I thought of was some decisions have to be made before you're in the situation. For instance, you decide before you're in a very serious dating relationship that you're going to marry someone who is on the same page, like the Shaner said, as far as your spirituality. You don't want to be married to someone who does not share your faith. It can work, but it's extremely difficult. I've seen that in friends before who were married to someone who did not share their faith, and it just was a constant struggle. One friend of mine said, if I had it to do over with, as much as I love my husband, if I had it to do over with, I would not marry him because he's not a believer. So, and just things, behaviors you're going to engage in dating, you need to decide before you're in that dating situation what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do and what lines you're not willing to cross. Because once you're in the situation, in the heat of the moment, it's very hard to then make a decision that's a good decision.
Yeah, and I would echo some of what Melanie's saying, to highly recommend marriage to you. It's the greatest blessing And unless you feel a distinct calling to be single and celibate, pursue marriage. But on this basis, uh, acknowledge, I love the Jim Brinkerhoff quote that you used a couple of weeks ago, Ben. Uh, the help I need to become the person God designed me to be is what you're looking for a partner who is all about that. And so I would say, number one, take the time, filled with curiosity, to get to know the person you're considering. And don't date anybody that's off the list. If you get to know them after a couple of dates and say, I'd never marry them, then end it. Because the purpose of dating is going to lead to marriage. And you can't choose after a year of hanging out with somebody whether you're really grown tremendously attached to them. So take the time and learn before you commit to an exclusive relationship. Learn enough about the person to know, are they trustworthy? Can I commit in an exclusive relationship? And certainly discover their trustworthiness and commit to the relationship before you let things advance romantically and physically. I think that's one of the biggest problems I see in couples, is that they didn't know what they were getting into. And you can never know somebody completely, even after you're married, but you can spend months watching them go through stresses, going to church with them, like the Shaner said. And then I really think it's important to practice keeping commitments and discern how your partner is keeping commitments. And I mean even little commitments, like, hey, let's see a movie on Friday night. I'll be there at 7 o'clock. And they blow you off at the last minute. Or, sure, I'll pick that up at the store while I'm there. And then they don't do it. And, I'll do this or I'll do that. I'll be there at 5, and they get there at 7 consistently. That's telling you something about their ability to keep commitments. And you may at least bring that up, because practicing keeping commitments really strengthens you and prepares you to keep that commitment you make when you say, I love you forever, before witnesses in sickness and in health.
Yeah. Shaners, what advice would you give students currently engaged or currently dating or currently looking for a dating relationship?
Don't be in a hurry to do anything, and relax. Like, just enjoy each phase that you're in. If you try to rush through things, you're liable, as Eric said, to discern poorly about someone's ability to make commitments or their how serious they are about their faith. But there's things that are fun about being in a dating relationship. There's things that are fun about being engaged. There's things that are fun about being married. Don't be in a hurry to just get married and skip some of the joys that come with the process.
Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that? Or is Matt just that good and he summed it all up?
Well, now that you put it that way, I'll add something.
First, and gave her time to answer first.
When I was thinking about it, I think I addressed it back in our, what my main piece of advice would be, what I kind of like when I was talking about our love story and about the guy I was dating and the deal breaker for me. Just sometimes you feel like you get far enough into a relationship and you have feelings for the other person in your heart. I've heard of other people who just go along with it because they feel like they love the person and they'll find a way to make it work, and they just don't, they can't imagine life without it. But there's some things that I think you need to, if you can decide even before you start dating, if you're not dating someone yet, figure out what your deal breakers are and, your hard lines, and stick with them. And the way you feel on spiritual issues, I think, is definitely one of those. So,
yeah. Just thank y'all so much. I mean, we're not even going to pray at the end of this, just to keep it shorter. I just want to thank y'all so much. We just want to thank y'all so much. This has been so cool. Even just like for us as a young married couple, this has been really helpful and transformational, and I know it will be for our students too. So yeah, just thank y'all so much.
Yeah.